I spent 1 week in that cabin and came back with white in my beard that hadn't been there before. It was supposed to be just a break, a getaway. I'd been working straight through for almost a year, construction mostly, and some minor electrical, grinding through long days and not sleeping well. City life had been piling on me more than I'd realized. I just wanted to get away, reset. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend, up in the northern part of the state. Remote. No neighbors. No road signs. You had to drive along this dirt path for nearly 40 minutes after the last bit of paved road, then park and hike a good half-mile down a narrow trail. The guy who owned it had stopped using it years ago and said I could stay for free if I just made sure no animals had gotten in and didn't burn it down. That was the whole deal. I brought what I needed: coolers with food, camp stove, batteries, tools, 2 jugs of water, my sleeping bag, a tarp, a headlamp, and a .30-30 lever-action rifle. I'm not a hunter, but I don't like being in the woods unarmed. I figured bears, maybe coyotes, nothing else to worry about. I got there on a Monday afternoon. It was early fall, and the trees were just starting to change. The air smelled clean. No smoke, no gas, no exhaust, just pine needles, dirt, and that dry, cold scent of rock and tree bark. The cabin sat in a small clearing, maybe 20 yards across, surrounded by trees thick enough that you couldn't see past them. The structure itself was solid. Log walls, 1 room, pitched roof, a porch out front with 2 steps. The inside was dusty but intact. Wood stove in the corner, a small table with a couple of rickety chairs, a metal frame cot with a thin mattress. The windows didn't have curtains, but they were clean, and none were broken. The first 2 days were great. I hiked, chopped some firewood, fished a little. The lake nearby was cold and still, full of reeds and lily pads. I didn't see anyone. No hikers, no hunters. Just me, the trees, and the occasional squirrel or bird. But on the 3rd night, I heard something strange. I was lying in the cot with the window cracked open to let in the cold air. The moon wasn't full, but it was bright enough to light up the trees faintly. I just started drifting when I heard a sound like dry leaves moving. Not the wind, not the way trees rustle. This was rhythmic, crunching, slow, like footsteps. I stayed still and listened. They came from the woods, just beyond the tree line. I counted 5 or 6 steps, then silence. A pause, then a few more. But it wasn't walking straight toward the cabin. It moved side to side, like it was circling. Each step was measured. No crashing, no stumbling. Whatever it was deliberate. Eventually the sound faded. I lay awake another hour before finally falling asleep. The next morning, I walked the perimeter. I looked for tracks, broken branches, claw marks, anything. I didn't find anything, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. Maybe a curious animal, or a person. But if it was a person, they didn't want me to know they were there. That afternoon I stacked wood around the fire pit and kept my rifle closer. On the 4th night, I woke up again. Same thing, soft steps in the leaves. But this time, they came closer. I sat up slowly and stayed still. The sound stopped maybe 10 feet from the front porch. I couldn't see out the window from the cot, but I didn't dare move. Then I heard breathing. Not heavy, not panting, just soft, shallow breaths, like something big standing still, listening. Then I heard the stairs creak, just once. The front porch had 2 steps, old wood, a little warped. I knew the sound they made because I'd walked up and down them myself. 1 creak and then nothing. I gripped the rifle, held my breath, and waited. But the sound didn't come back. After about an hour, I finally stood up and stepped toward the window. It was too dark to see anything clearly, but I didn't see movement, didn't hear any more sounds. Whatever it was, it had come up to the porch and then vanished. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I stayed close to the cabin. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I was. Something had been standing right outside my door. Not making noise, not attacking, just watching. That was worse than anything else. It wasn't acting like a normal animal. It wasn't rummaging or sniffing around or scavenging. It was just there. That evening, I found something strange by the woodpile. 3 small rocks had been stacked into a little pile, right in the middle of the clearing. I hadn't put them there. They were smooth and flat, like river stones, balanced neatly, almost perfectly centered, not like they'd been kicked or tossed. It looked intentional. I stared at them for a while, then knocked the stack over. That night, the steps didn't come, but something scratched the back wall. Not hard, just a few slow scrapes. I couldn't tell if it was claws or something else, but it was high, maybe 6 or 7 feet up, far above where a raccoon or fox could reach. I jumped out of bed and aimed the rifle toward the back door. The scraping stopped. I opened the door quickly, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other, but nothing was there. Just the woods, quiet, still. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat at the table all night, facing the window, watching the tree line. When the sun rose, I found more marks on the back wall. For thin gouges in the wood, nearly a foot long, right where I'd heard the scratching. They were spaced evenly apart, straight lines, too clean for animal claws. I was starting to lose it. That day I considered hiking out, but I had one day left, and part of me wanted to understand what was happening. I didn't want to leave scared. I wanted to know what it was. That night, I built a big fire and stayed outside until late. I kept my back to the cabin, rifle across my lap. I watched the woods carefully. Around midnight, I heard it again. Those same soft, slow steps in the leaves. But this time, I didn't freeze. I stood and moved toward the sound. I didn't use my flashlight. I let the moonlight guide me. The steps stopped as soon as I moved, but I kept going, quiet and slow. About 15 feet from the cabin, I saw something move behind a tree. It was fast, just a flash of shape and color, but it was tall and thin. It didn't walk like a person, more like something crouched and long, moving low but upright. I raised my rifle not to shoot but just to track. Then I saw the eyes, 2 reflections caught in the moonlight, low to the ground but facing me directly. They didn't blink. They didn't move, just stared. Then the thing stood. I don't know how tall it was, maybe 7 feet. Its outline was narrow, almost frail, with limbs that looked too long. Its arms, or maybe they were front legs, hung down past its knees. I couldn't make out much detail, just shape. But it didn't look human, and it didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. It turned without a sound and disappeared into the trees. I didn't follow. I backed slowly to the cabin, locked the door, and didn't move the rest of the night. In the morning, I packed everything. I didn't eat. I didn't check for tracks. I just loaded my gear, slung the rifle over my back, and hiked out. I reached the truck around noon and didn't look back. On the drive home, I didn't feel relief. I just felt exhausted, like something had watched me, tested me, and decided not to do anything. For now, I haven't gone back to that cabin. I thought about telling someone, reporting it, but what would I say? That a strange thing walked around my cabin at night? That it made no sound but left scratch marks on the wall? That it stacked rocks and stared at me with 2 large eyes? No one would believe that. I've had people say maybe it was just a bear with mange or a person in the woods messing with me. But I know what I saw. That thing didn't move like a bear. It didn't move like a man. It moved with a purpose. It was quiet, aware, and not afraid. Now, whenever I walk in the woods, even near home, I carry that memory. I still camp sometimes, but never alone. And I never sleep without a fire. I listen for the steps, the slow crunch of dry leaves, the kind that come a few at a time, just enough to let you know it's there. Because I believe that thing, whatever it was, wasn't just passing through. It knew I was there, and it let me leave. But I don't think it was the first time it had watched someone at that cabin. And I don't think it will be the last. I'd been going to that cabin for years. It belonged to my uncle originally, but after he passed, nobody really wanted it. Too far out. No cell signal. No power, no plumbing, no comforts. Just a 1-room structure deep in the northern woods, surrounded by thick pine forest, a tiny lake out back, and not another soul for miles. But I liked it that way. It was a place where time didn't follow you, where your head could quiet down for a while. That summer, I went up there alone. I didn't have much going on. The kind of job that comes and goes, no relationships that mattered. I just wanted some quiet, time to think, maybe fix up the place a little. I brought the usual gear: tools, fishing rod, canned food, stove fuel, batteries, tarp, .22 rifle for small game. I also had my notebook and a couple of old paperbacks I'd been meaning to reread. That's all I needed. The road to the cabin was worse than I remembered. The trees had pushed in, and the gravel had mostly washed out in some spots. I parked about half a mile down and hiked the rest. My pack was too heavy, but I was used to that. When I finally reached the clearing and saw the cabin, it felt like stepping back in time. The same warped porch boards, the same rusted hinges, the same broken chair leaning under the overhang. Still standing, though. Still mine, in a way. The first few days were uneventful. I swept the place out, cleaned the old stove, patched a few leaks in the roof. The nights were cool but not cold, so I slept with the windows cracked. All I could hear was the forest, wind in the trees, the occasional owl, the rustling of smaller animals. The kind of sounds you forget how to appreciate when you've been in the city too long. It was on the 5th day that things started to change. I'd gone fishing early that morning. The lake out back was small and still, the kind of place you could hear a splash from across the water. I set up on the old dock, tossed the line in, and waited. I caught 2 small perch when I noticed something odd. A noise from the far end of the lake. Not water, not an animal moving through underbrush. It was something higher pitched, rhythmic, almost like a whistle, but not quite. It didn't sound like any bird I knew, and I knew most of the birds out here. It was short, maybe 5 or 6 seconds, and then gone. I sat still for a while, waiting for it again, but the woods went quiet, completely quiet. Even the bugs seemed to stop for a bit. That silence stuck with me. Later that day, I walked around the lake, thinking maybe I could find the source of the sound. There were no trails out there, just thick pine needles, moss, and roots. The other side of the lake had some rock outcrops, boulders coated in lichen. I didn't find anything unusual. No tracks, no feathers, no signs of large animals. But I did get that strange feeling in my gut. The kind you get when you're being watched, even though you can't prove it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft sounds. Clicking, faint taps on the roof, branches snapping nearby. I told myself it was just the woods. Trees settle, squirrels run around, sometimes things fall. But around 2 or 3 a.m., I heard it again. That whistle, closer this time, clearer. 5 short rising notes, sharp and mechanical sounding. Not quite natural, not like any bird call I'd ever heard. Then something landed on the roof. It was heavy, not like a squirrel or a raccoon. I felt the weight through the rafters. A slow step, then another. It crossed from one side of the roof to the other. I froze in my cot, rifle beside me, staring at the ceiling. I thought about going outside. I thought about yelling, but I didn't. I just lay there, heart pounding, listening to each step until it stopped at the edge above the porch. And then nothing. In the morning, I climbed up and checked the roof. There weren't any tracks, just dust, some needles, a few fresh scrapes in the wood near the overhang. 3 thin grooves like claw marks, each maybe a foot long. Not deep, but clean, sharp. The next few days, I started paying more attention. I set up a few snares for rabbits, checked them morning and evening. One of them was triggered, but nothing caught, just a broken wire and blood on the ground. Another was missing entirely. I found it 20 feet away, snapped in half like it had been torn from the tree. Not the work of a rabbit, not a fox either. It looked yanked hard and fast, like something had seen it and ripped it free. I stopped walking in the woods at night. I kept the fire going longer. I kept the rifle closer. On the 8th day, just after sunrise, I found the feathers. They were scattered across the porch, black with a greenish shimmer, like oil on water. Long and narrow, but not from any bird I knew. There were dozens, maybe more, laid out in a rough circle, like someone had arranged them on purpose. In the center was a dead bird, small, maybe a sparrow, with its head missing. His body was untouched otherwise. No blood, just missing the head, like it had been neatly twisted off and placed there. I burned the feathers. I swept the porch clean, tossed the bird into the woods, and kept my fire going all day. That night, the sound came back. Not the whistle this time, something else. A low screech, drawn out, almost like metal dragging on stone. It echoed once, then stopped. I didn't sleep. Around midnight, something hit the window. Not hard enough to break it, but sharp enough to make the glass rattle. I jumped up, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other, and pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, just darkness and trees. I opened the door slowly and stepped onto the porch. The forest was silent. I panned the flashlight slowly, beam cutting through mist that had started rolling off the lake. Then I caught it, just for a second, movement at the edge of the clearing. A shape, tall, thin, upright. It stepped behind a tree before I could focus on it, but it had the profile of something bird-like. Long limbs, neck extended, something like wings folded tight to its back. But way too big, and upright. No bird I've ever seen walked like that. I backed inside and locked the door. The next day, I built a fire pit outside and kept it lit all day. I sharpened a few sticks, set up makeshift trip lines with cans and wire around the cabin, and tried to stay calm. I still hadn't seen it clearly. I still wasn't sure what I was dealing with. But it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a mountain lion, and it definitely wasn't just a bird. That night, it came closer. The trip lines rattled just after midnight. I woke to the sound of cans clattering against each other and jumped up. I didn't turn on my flashlight this time. I sat in the dark, listening. The sound of slow movement through dry needles. The soft crunch of footfalls. Then the whistle, 5 rising notes, clearer than ever, just outside the window. Then tapping. 1, 2, 3 taps on the glass, soft but deliberate. I sat perfectly still. Tapped again, 3 more, evenly spaced. I finally flicked the flashlight on and turned it toward the window. Nothing. But on the wood just outside, I saw them, 3 deep scratches, fresh, cutting across the wall. Like a message. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I packed everything. I wasn't going to stay another night. I could have stayed and waited to get a better look. Maybe figured out what it was. But something in my gut told me that was the wrong move. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just passing through. It was watching, testing. It had been getting closer each night. Learning. I strapped everything down and hiked out. Made it back to the truck by afternoon. Soaked in sweat, eyes jumping at every sound. Drove the whole way back without stopping once. When I got home, I unpacked and tried to explain to myself what had happened. Maybe it was some kind of rare animal, some migratory bird with strange behaviors. Maybe it had a nest nearby, felt threatened. But that didn't explain the tools being moved. The feathers arranged in a circle, the way it walked, the way it watched, the sounds it made, the quiet. I never went back to the cabin. I keep paying the small property tax just to keep it under my name, but I haven't stepped foot on that land since. I think about it sometimes, though. I think about what it was trying to do, why it kept getting closer, what might have happened if I'd stayed one more night. I don't tell many people. Most would just shrug it off or joke, call it a cryptid or some backwoods myth. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. It wasn't a ghost and it wasn't a fairy tale. It was something real, something that didn't want me there. And whatever it was, it watched me from the trees for days without ever needing to say a word. Now, whenever I go into the woods, I listen closely. And when the forest suddenly goes quiet, I leave. Every time.
No hesitaste.
Because I remember that sound, that whistle, and I'm not going to wait around to hear it again. It started because I wanted some time away from everything. Not forever, just long enough to let things stop spinning. Work was a mess. My phone never stopped buzzing. Life felt like one long noise. I needed quiet, and I thought the best way to get it was to go where the signal couldn't reach me. I found the cabin listed online. An old place in the mountains, several miles off any paved road. The photos made it look peaceful. Trees surrounding it like a wall, a stream nearby, with stacked neatly along the side. There was no electricity, no plumbing, and no one within shouting distance. That sounded perfect. I packed enough for 2 weeks. food that wouldn't spoil, a water filter, my old .30-06 rifle, mostly for peace of mind. I brought a notebook, a few books, my sleeping bag, and a small solar charger to keep a flashlight and GPS alive. I left my phone off. I didn't want any part of the world getting through. The drive up was long, a winding gravel road that narrowed with every mile, until I was pretty sure it hadn't been driven in years. The cabin was there at the end of it, like it had always been waiting. Small, dark wood, steep roof, chimney with bird nests sticking out. The trees around it were tall and thick. Even at noon, it felt like early morning under their shade. Inside was better than I expected. Dusty but solid. One room with a cot, a table, and shelves nailed into the wall. Someone had left a few things, old pots, some tools, even an axe leaned by the door. There was a cast iron stove in the corner. I tested it. Still worked. The first few days were perfect. I set up a routine, coffee in the morning, hikes during the day, writing or reading in the evening. I collected deadwood, chopped logs, and kept the stove going once the temperature dropped. At night, it got cold fast, and the wind pushed through the trees like a river. I started sleeping in layers, rifle beside the bed, just in case. On the fourth night, I woke up to a noise. It was a deep, slow thud. I didn't move at first. I just lay there in the dark, eyes open, trying to decide if it was part of a dream. Then I heard it again, louder. Something was moving outside the cabin. Heavy, not steps exactly, more like shifting weight. Then a low huffing sound. Breathing. I sat up and reached for the rifle. The fire was still smoldering, casting faint orange shadows across the walls. I could hear it now. Something moving along the side of the cabin. The boards creaked. Then something brushed against the wall. Slow, steady. I didn't open the door. I didn't even get close. I sat on the edge of the cot with the rifle in my lap and stared at the door until light started showing through the cracks. Whatever it was didn't come in, but it didn't run off either. Stayed for a long time. I could hear it out there, breathing. In the morning, I went outside. The ground was damp from a bit of rain. Mud held every footprint like wet concrete. I found the tracks near the porch. Big ones. Wide, round pads, claw marks like blunt knives pressed into the mud. A bear. A big one. Grizzly, maybe. I crouched down next to them and held my hand out. The track dwarfed it. I should have left right then. But I told myself it was just passing through. Maybe curious. Maybe following a scent. I made a bigger fire that night. I made noise when I walked. I hung a few things from the trees to rattle if touched. Old pots and spoons tied with string. Nothing high-tech. Just something to give me warning if it came close again. 2 nights later, I heard it again. This time, it came around the back. I'd left a bucket with some food scraps by the edge of the trees. Dumb. I knew better, but I hadn't expected a bear to come this far out. The sound it made when it found that bucket froze the blood in my body. A deep, guttural grunt followed by the scraping of claws on wood and then a short roar. Not loud, but sharp like a warning. I didn't sleep that night either. In the morning, I found the bucket flattened like a beer can. The ground was torn up, and the prints were deeper, more erratic. The bear had stayed a while, maybe tried to find more. The trees around the edge of the clearing had fresh scratches. 3 thick lines down one trunk, like it had marked the spot. That day, I moved all the food inside. I reinforced the door with boards and nails from the back shelf. I stacked firewood against the outer wall. I knew it wouldn't stop a bear if it really wanted in, but it might slow it down. I started sleeping in short bursts, waking every hour to listen. The air felt heavier. Even the birds went quiet. 3 days passed with no sign. I started hoping it had moved on. Maybe it got bored. Maybe it had found easier food somewhere else. Then came the storm. It rolled in from the west in the late afternoon. Fast, hard, and cold. Rain like buckets pouring from the sky. Thunder close enough to shake the walls. I stayed inside, stove burning, reading under a blanket. The rain turned to sleet, then snow, just enough to dust the ground and ice over the trees. Around midnight, I heard the thump again. First, I thought it was wind, a branch falling. Then I heard the unmistakable crunch of snow under weight. Slow, heavy, closer. I stood, rifle in hand, and backed toward the corner. The cabin was small enough that I could see both windows from there. Then I heard a scraping sound. Something was pressing against the door, not hitting it, just leaning. Then the snuffling started. Wet, animal breaths pushed through the gap under the door. It was smelling me, no doubt now. I could hear it breathing, smell it too, musky, thick, like wet fur and old meat. I felt my knees lock. My fingers tightened around the stock of the rifle. Then the door creaked. The bear pushed, slow and steady, testing the resistance. The whole door shuddered. The beam I'd nailed in groaned under the weight. I raised the rifle, heart pounding in my ears, finger on the trigger, pushed harder. I fired. The sound was deafening in the cabin. The blast echoed off the walls, and I dropped to one knee from the force. The door cracked with splintering, but it held. I heard a roar then, louder than anything I'd ever heard. Raw, angry. The bear slammed into the door once, twice, then nothing. Silence. I stayed there for hours. I didn't reload. I didn't move. Just sat, frozen, waiting. The wind howled. The sleet turned to rain again. I heard nothing else. When dawn came, I finally stepped outside. The porch was torn up. The door had deep gouges in it. One of the beams was split. Blood marked the edge of the frame, just a smear. Not enough to kill anything, but maybe enough to scare it off. The snow had melted, but the prints were still there, deep and sharp. I packed everything that morning, left half the food behind, stuffed what I could into my pack. I started walking down the road, rifle in hand, checking every direction. I walked all day, no breaks. The road was flooded in parts, washed out in others. I crossed cold streams barefoot and climbed over fallen trees, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to spend another night anywhere near that place. By nightfall, I reached the ranger station near the base. Empty, locked, but there was a dry bench under the awning. I slept there, rifle in my lap, legs cramping. But I slept. I told the story later. Not to everyone, just a few people. Most nodded, said that's wild, and went on with their day. Some told me I was lucky. I knew that already. I'd seen what those claws could do to wood. I'd heard how it breathed when it knew I was inside. I never went back to that cabin. I never asked for a refund. I never even looked at the listing again. Some places don't want you there. Some places still belong to the old things that walk through them when the wind's up and the forest is dark and quiet. I still go into the woods sometimes, but I never stay long, and I never forget to carry extra shells. Not because I want to shoot anything, but because I know now that sometimes, when everything is quiet, when the fire dies down and you're sure you're alone, something out there might be waiting. And it might not knock. It might lean and breathe and decide whether or not you're worth the trouble. I didn't plan to stay at the cabin. It happened by accident. I was on a solo road trip trying to clear my head. After a few long months at work and the end of a bad relationship, I just wanted to get away from everyone and everything. I figured I would drive west and stop wherever it felt right. No hotels booked, no fixed plans. Just me, my car, and a bunch of camping gear in the trunk. 3 days in, I hit a stretch of mountain highway in the early evening. The sky was turning orange, and the road ahead was nothing but winding turns and forest. I passed a sign that read, Lake Marlow 5 miles, and figured that sounded good. I followed a dirt road off the main highway, bouncing over potholes and loose gravel until I reached a faded wooden sign that read Marlow Camp and Cabins. There was no one at the main lodge, just an old office with a note on the door that said, "Take a key, leave your name." There were keys hanging on nails, each with a number tag. I grabbed one labeled number 4 and wrote my name in the dusty notebook on the counter. It felt more like trespassing than checking in. But there was a drop box for cash and a faded sign that said, $25 per night. I stuffed a few bills in the slot. Cabin number 4 was small, half sunken into the earth, tucked at the edge of the tree line. It had a little porch, a single dusty window, and a door that creaked like something from an old horror movie. The inside was simple. One bed, one table, a few shelves, and a rusted propane heater that looked like it hadn't worked in years. No electricity, no cell service, no plumbing. There was an outhouse nearby and a water spigot in the clearing. It was rough, but I liked it. The sun went down fast, and the forest turned quiet. I ate a sandwich from the cooler, set up my sleeping bag on the old mattress, and read a paperback by lantern light until I got too tired to keep my eyes open. I fell asleep fast. I woke up sometime after midnight to a noise, a low scraping sound, not close, faint, like metal on dirt. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon dragging something, but it went on longer than it should have. I sat up and listened. It stopped. I turned off the lantern, thinking maybe the light was attracting animals. After a while, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, everything seemed fine. The air was cool and fresh, the trees bright green in the morning sun. I made coffee on my camp stove and ate a granola bar while sitting on the porch. Nothing felt wrong. I told myself the noise was just my imagination, or an animal, or both. I stayed another night. That second night, the noise came again. This time it was closer. It started with a faint crunching of leaves, like someone walking slowly through the woods. Then a soft scrape, then silence. It stopped and started like whoever was making the noise was waiting, listening. I sat up and turned off the lantern. My heart was pounding. I couldn't see anything outside the window. It was just black beyond the glass. The scraping came again, metal on wood, then footsteps on the porch. That's when I felt it. Fear. Real sharp fear. The kind that doesn't let you move. I didn't have a gun, just a folding knife in my bag and a heavy flashlight. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the door, trying not to make noise. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps had stopped. Everything was still. I waited a long time before I dared to open the door. When I did, there was no one there, just damp boards and an empty clearing. But at the edge of the porch, on the old wood rail, there were scratches. Deep grooves, freshly cut, like someone had dragged a blade along it. I felt sick. I should have left then, but I didn't. I told myself it could have been an animal, a bear, or some local messing around. I stayed because I was stubborn, because I didn't want to admit I was scared. The third night was different. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with the flashlight beside me, listening. For hours, there was nothing, just crickets and wind. But then, after midnight, it started again. The footsteps, slow, careful, not through the woods this time, closer, from behind the cabin. Then the handle on the back door turned. It was locked. I had bolted it from the inside, but I saw the handle twitch. I froze. My chest felt like it had caved in. I stared at the door, willing it to stay shut. The handle turned again. Then nothing. I stayed awake the rest of the night. No more sounds came, but I didn't sleep. At dawn, I packed my things. I was going to leave, but before I did, I walked around the cabin to check the back door. The ground was damp with morning dew, and that's when I saw the footprints. Not boots, not bare feet, just socks. There were prints coming from the trees, right up to the back door, then looping around to the side window, then gone. I drove out fast. I didn't stop at the lodge. I didn't leave another payment. I just left. I kept thinking about the footprints, about how you don't wear just socks in the woods, about how someone had to walk through thorns and sticks and mud with no shoes on. That didn't make sense. I made it to the nearest town and filled up on gas. I asked the clerk if they knew about the Marlowe cabins. He said the place had been shut down for years, that no one was supposed to stay there. Liability issues, rotting structures, unsafe conditions. I told him I stayed in cabin number 4. He looked confused, then said, "That one burned down a while ago, years back. Some kids got in and set it on fire." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I drove back toward the highway. I passed the same dirt road but didn't turn in. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to find out if the cabin had really been gone all this time. Because if it had, I didn't know what that meant. I checked my phone when I got service again. There were no photos, I had taken a few shots of the lake, of the porch, of my breakfast. All gone, like they were never saved. But in my pocket, I still had the key. Metal tag, faded number 4. I never returned it. Sometimes, when I hold it, I remember the sound of the door handle turning, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't locked it. I didn't expect much from the cabin. It was just something cheap I found online, buried in the middle of the Appalachians in West Virginia, maybe 30 minutes from the nearest gas station, and miles from anyone who'd care if I went missing. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just a week off the grid to let my head clear. I was in a rough place back then. Work was draining me dry, my girlfriend had just walked out on me, and my phone had started feeling like a leash more than a tool. I just wanted to sleep in silence and walk through the woods without seeing another soul. The road leading to the cabin was more like a broken trail, barely wide enough for my car, and the gravel was so thin it scraped the undercarriage if I wasn't careful. When I finally pulled up, the sun had already started to dip behind the trees. The cabin looked worse in person. Tilted a little, a patchwork roof, and a front porch that looked like one strong wind could send it flying. But it was dry, it had a wood stove, and the inside smelled like cedar and dust, which was honestly better than most apartments I'd lived in. There was no cell service. I tried to call my buddy to let him know I'd made it, but the phone just sat there, searching for signal until the battery drained. The place had no electricity, no running water, and only a composting toilet out back, but that was fine. I'd stocked up on canned food, water, firewood, and even brought a solar charger for emergencies. I figured the worst I'd face would be boredom. I didn't realize how wrong I was. That first night was calm. The woods were quiet, not dead, but still. Just the occasional owl and the rustling of wind through the leaves. I built a small fire inside, made myself a plate of beans and corned beef, and sat on the front steps with a blanket around my shoulders, sipping cheap whiskey from a plastic bottle. The stars were clearer than I'd seen in years. No sirens, no neighbors yelling, no buzzing electronics. It was perfect. The second night, I heard something. It was late, maybe close to midnight. I'd been lying on the cot in the corner of the cabin, trying to fall asleep, when I heard what sounded like a branch snapping. Then another. Not the kind that falls naturally, but the kind that breaks under pressure, like weight. Heavy weight. I sat up and waited, listening, thinking maybe it was a deer, but the steps kept coming. 4 of them, uneven. Then silence. Then 2 more, much closer. I reached for the axe I kept next to the cot. Just a basic camp axe, but better than nothing. The steps stopped maybe 20 feet from the front porch. I couldn't see anything through the window, just my reflection and the black woods beyond. I held still for what felt like 20 minutes. Then I heard something sniff. A long, deep breath being pulled through nostrils, like whatever it was trying to catch a scent. Eventually, the steps moved off, slow and steady, deeper into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie back down. I just sat in the corner, axe in my lap, waiting for something to return. But nothing came back, not that night. In the morning, I told myself it had just been a bear, or maybe a coyote. Something wild, sure, but still normal. I walked around the cabin looking for prints, but didn't find anything. The soil was dry and full of leaves. No clear impressions. Still, the hairs on my arms were standing the whole time I was out there, and I kept glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The third night, the scratching started. It was light at first, like nails on the outer walls. I thought maybe it was branches tapping the wood in the wind. But the air was still, and the scratching came from low to the ground, maybe knee-height. I got up, opened the door quietly, and shined my flashlight around the porch. Nothing. I walked the perimeter, careful not to stray too far from the light of the lantern I'd hung on a hook by the door. Still nothing. But as I rounded the back corner, I caught something in the beam. 2 eyes, low to the ground, yellowish and wide. They reflected the light like glass, but blinked quickly, disappearing into the brush without a sound. The eyes were too far apart to be a raccoon or a fox, too low for a deer, too big for anything that should have been crawling around out there. I stayed inside the next day, didn't even go out to the outhouse. I peed in a bottle and sat near the fire most of the time, trying to read, trying not to think too much. I kept hearing things in the woods, branches snapping again, and low, animalistic sounds that didn't belong to any bird I'd ever heard. I started to think maybe I was losing it. Cabin fever, stress hallucinations, something like that. But I didn't feel feverish. I felt watched. The fourth night, things got worse. I heard it breathing, not just outside, but right outside the wall, where my head would have been if I were sleeping. It was rhythmic, heavy, like someone with asthma or pneumonia. Then the scratching started again, this time louder, more deliberate, dragging across the outer planks in long, slow lines. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. The axe was in my hands again, but I wasn't sure what I'd do if it actually came through the wall. Then came the sound of something rubbing or dragging its body against the wood, like it was leaning into the wall, feeling it. That night, I heard it circle the cabin 3 times, slow and steady, then silence. In the morning, I saw the marks, deep grooves like claw marks, about 2 inches apart, too sharp for hooves, too consistent for random damage. They ran in parallel lines about 3 feet off the ground all the way around the cabin. I wanted to pack up and leave, but the car was parked down the hill and I'd have to haul everything in one trip or leave supplies behind. I didn't feel right walking into the woods with my back turned, not even for 10 minutes. So I stayed. One more night. I told myself I'd leave at first light no matter what. I didn't sleep. I kept the lantern lit all night and sat on the floor with my back against the cot. I had the axe in one hand and a hunting knife in the other. I wasn't a hunter. I'd bought the knife for cutting rope and opening cans. But that night, I was ready to use it on something alive. Around midnight, it came back. I didn't hear it approach, not like before. It was just suddenly there on the porch, its weight pressing the old wood with slow, deliberate creaks. Then silence. Then something brushed against the door. The door handle moved. It didn't rattle like in the movies. It just turned, slowly, like someone testing it, like they didn't want to be heard. It turned halfway and stopped. Then again, more forcefully. Then the door shifted in the frame, like a shoulder had leaned into it. I sat still, holding my breath, not blinking. The axe felt like a toy in my hands. My legs were numb from sitting so long, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the door gave a small crack. Not opening, just the sound of wood under stress. I think it was testing it, measuring how strong the barrier was. After what felt like hours, it moved off. This time I heard it clearly. Claws clicking on wood, the steps deliberate and strangely paced. It wasn't walking like a bear or a mountain lion. It was calculated. I heard it jump off the porch, land in the dirt, and vanish into the woods again. To first light, I packed everything. Didn't eat, didn't even finish half my gear. I threw the essentials in a duffel and sprinted to the car. Every 10 feet I turned around, expecting to see those yellow eyes again. But nothing followed me. The forest was still and damp with morning fog. When I got to the car, I found tracks beside it. 4 of them, deep with long indentations at the toes, as if claws had dug into the gravel. They weren't bare prints, too narrow, almost like giant dog tracks, but wrong in shape. And there were only 4, one set, as if something had stood there watching, maybe waiting for me to come back. I drove straight to a motel 3 hours away. Didn't stop for gas or food until I was miles from the tree line. That night, I slept with the lights on and a knife under my pillow. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I never went back to that cabin. A year later, I paid someone to go retrieve what I'd left behind. Sleeping bag, cooler, gear, whatever. They called me after and said the place had been torn apart. Door broken in half, claw marks on the walls. Something had chewed through the cot mattress. They said it looked like a bear had gone mad inside it. But bears don't turn doorknobs. I know what I saw, or at least what I felt. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a fairy tale monster. Whatever it was flesh and blood. And it knew how to move quietly, how to wait, how to observe. It was real. A thing that hunts. I've read about feral people, genetic throwbacks, things that live off the grid so long they become something else entirely. Maybe that's what it was. A human once, maybe, twisted by isolation, by hunger, by time. Maybe some small population still exists out there, deep in those woods, feeding when they have to, moving like animals, living like myths, but not myths. I'll never go back to the forest alone. I don't care how cheap the cabin is. I don't care how badly I need to get away. Some places were never meant for people to be alone. And some things that look like stories are just waiting for us to stop believing.